wants to be here.
Could I ask members of the Toronto East York Community Council to please take their seats? I hate doing that. Councillor Layton, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Cressy. I'm going to have to bang my gavel.
I want to hear it. Whoa! The gavel.
Councillor Layton.
Give him another shot, Gord.
Councillor Bailao.
I'm going to come over and bang.
I need to start the meeting.
Didn't you hear the gavel?
Thank you, members. Our next order of business is TE 10.34, Commercial Boulevard Parking Appeal 170 Bedford Road. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a deputation on this item? I see none. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a motion, and this is a referral motion asking for two pieces of information to come to our December meeting. That's a breakdown of the associated fees for the spots. There's the feasibility of installing a two-car loading zone on Bedford at this location. The report outlines a rather steep cost to the parking spots. I would just like outlined in some detail because the applicant is saying that they're unfair. And then the second piece is if we may be able to accomplish this with just a two-car loading zone on Bedford, which I think everyone would like more. So I'm going to put this forward and ask for a report back and see what comes.
I note that Councillor Wong Tam is not with us. I know she's in the building. So I'm going to hold on to 1044 until she's back, which takes us to 10.46, extended approval for year-round operation of parklets and parklet cafes on King Street and Duncan Street. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a deputation on this item? Seeing none. Councillor Cressy on 1046.
Yes, I have a technical amendment that staff provided that I can move. There we are. And with that, I can move staff recommendations.
Okay, so with the amendment, we'll take it all as one. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Next item is TE 10.49, making parking pad rules clearer and creating a path for electrical vehicle charging on residential streets. We have a number of deputants. John Slaughter. John? No? Deborah DeLange? Hi, Deborah. Come on up. Just take any seat you like. That's perfect. And just check that the light is on in front of your microphone there. Okay. You'll have 5 minutes, and you can watch your time over here on the wall clock to my right.
Hello, my name is Deborah DeLange, a Beaches East York resident, and I would like to thank the committee for this opportunity to speak on this very important issue. Many of us in Beaches East York find it hard to choose to drive an electric vehicle because we cannot park and charge the EV at our homes overnight. Many of us do not have driveways, as in my case, and many of my neighbors' cases. I own a home without parking. Thus, I am here to support Councillor Bradford's recommendation, referred to as making parking pad rules clearer and creating a path for electric vehicle charging on residential streets, as per his letter. First, I'd like to state that I agree with Councillor Bradford's points as outlined in my deputation document. My points are the following. 1, the City of Toronto has officially recognized that we are facing a climate emergency, and thus we must do everything possible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Where possible, for the multiple purposes of reducing traffic congestion, local pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions, it is better if residents do not drive cars and use alternative transportation options instead. However, this is an unrealistic expectation for many in the city, given the well-recognized problems we are having in building out our public transit system, not to mention accessibility issues. Many people have to drive an automobile to continue in their jobs and make a living, facilitate family and social life, etc. Moreover, we have to recognize that although some might like to see an overnight transition to, for example, car as a service and other related approaches other than individual car ownership, our culture has been one of car ownership for decades. This individualism and association of the car with freedom will not change overnight, as evidenced by the fact that even most residents with driveways still drive gas cars. Moreover, in a democratic society, we have to respect and facilitate choice. Councillor Bradford's proposal is a balance between facilitating choice while motivating lower emissions lifestyles. 2. Although Toronto's residents have access to clean electricity and electric vehicles are widely available, we are continuing to pollute and increase greenhouse gas emissions by driving vehicles with combustion engines. Our main source of GHGs in Ontario is from transportation, not energy. Thus, we need incentives in Toronto to switch gas cars to EVs. A parking pad adds to the value of a home. Thus, this becomes an incentive for choosing an EV with the proposed linkage. Paying attention to the design of incentives in any policy is important. Admittedly, more concrete in Toronto is not favorable, but many residents do need to park a car at their home, and asking them to choose an EV instead of a gas car in return for granting them a parking pad is a reasonable request and a balanced approach, solving two problems at the same time. 3. At this time, neither the City of Toronto nor Ontario is facilitating the switch from gas cars to EVs, although the federal government offers some relatively minor incentives, only up to $5,000. The most recently elected Ontario government stopped the previous government's EV incentives that were helping people switch to electric vehicles. The CBC has explained that EV sales have dropped more than 50% since the incentives were removed. Now, those residents who do not have parking, choosing to pay the high out-of-pocket cost of an EV, cannot even park near home and charge overnight when it is most convenient and the price of electricity is lowest. Therefore, under the current conditions, we are stopping many of those even willing to pay the higher initial price of an EV from making this environmentally friendly choice, which is beneficial to all of our health. 4, for our city economy to work well, we have to help people get to work in a low-carbon way. Transit is stalled and has been stalled for decades, and the province is not facilitating transit or low-emission solutions. So it is incumbent on the City of Toronto to act on climate change and foster its own economy as well as a high standard of living. The City of Toronto can claim to have made progress supporting a strong economy and acting on climate change by recommending the proposed solution. 5, even if the province were offering incentives, the city would need to find a way to help residents without parking own and use EVs instead of gas cars to allow them to make the choice. We should not have to move from our homes in order to have a choice. This solution is urgent because residents are feeling increasingly frustrated that they do not have a choice. 6, in addition to the councillor's recommendation,
I could ask you just to wrap up with one final thought.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask?
Do you have one final thought? Is that, or is, that's good enough? Go ahead, questions.
Thanks very much for the deputation. Very quickly, if you wanted to purchase an electric vehicle today, would you be able to do that?
I have a house with a tree on the front, so I can't have an electric vehicle.
What strategies do you think the city could bring forward to help support electric vehicle charging in Toronto?
Well, I think your recommendation is one of them, but for those of us who can't have a parking pad in any case because we have other things on our front yard, we need to have some charging along the street perhaps, or at the end of, at the end of streets, like in our neighborhood, we have those kind of ends and places where you can put charging, so it's walkable to get to my car in the morning. And remember, we have cold winters and they're getting colder, so it does need to be reasonably close. The other thing too is that with all these windstorms, we're having problems with AC systems, electrical. I'm an electrical engineer and I've worked with Ontario Hydro, so and we've seen also wildfires in California because of the electrical systems, partially combined with climate issues and and windstorms. So, you can also put in new lines, and I think Toronto Hydro has been doing some of this, but you can bury DC lines instead of having AC systems. And then you could put charging infrastructure attached to those AC systems. Or, you could probably use the existing systems and do that now, so it wouldn't be as expensive. But there are options for example, burying, the wiring in along the sidewalk edges so that you could put plugs like right in the sidewalks, for example. I think what we need to do is talk to some of our clean tech entrepreneurs in this city, because we have tremendous talent, and ask them to develop through a stakeholder consultation, how can we do this? And so we have to have accessibility for people who will never be able to have a parking pad, but your recommendation is one good step along the way.
So it's going to be a collective process.
I think so, and yeah, we have lots of talent in the city. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Deborah.
Are there any other questions of the deputy? Seeing none, thank you. Janet Davis.
Who?
Now, Janet,
I have 5.
you know the rules, and I want to be clear. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm going to love it when you get to the end of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to make sure that you have my communication because it was incomplete when it was distributed. I just want to make sure you have my communication. It was reprinted over the lunch. It's 3 pages. Okay. Thank you very much. And it is actually a pleasure to be here again. As you know, what is before you is a set of recommendations from Councillor Bradford that delete provisions of Chapter 918 that limit the amount of front yard parking pads in former Ward 31. It also, for immediate implementation. The second portion of his recommendations asks for a staff report for the future on the possibility of imposing the requirement for hydro charging stations for front yard parking pads. So let me just highlight the rationale that's been provided by the councillor and why I think that there are fundamental flaws. One, the councillor suggests that the bylaw currently is confusing. And while there are many provisions, it is pretty clear. It says you can't apply for a front yard parking pad, but you can appeal if there is no other parking available, and that includes on-street permit parking. It is simple. You can park. If you can't park, you can appeal to Community Council for a front yard parking pad. So it's not a matter of confusion. Secondly, there's a suggestion that there's a need to harmonize the north and south parts of the new ward. There are many things that have not been harmonized north and south, such as snow clearing, as you know. We have very distinct and different zoning bylaws across the existing ward, and we have not moved to harmonize everything within the new wards. And lastly, I think the approach, while laudable to look at enhancing access to hydro charging stations, it really puts the cart before the horse. It says, go ahead and you can install front yard parking pads now in Ward 19, and sometime in the future we will get a report. I'd like to suggest that is the wrong approach, and that what you need to do is, if you're going to consider the installation of any future front yard parking pads and making them any easier, or legalizing the many that are there that create very unfair conditions, then we should make sure that there are other environmental benefits from installing any new front yard parking pads. As you know, right now, while it says they must have permeable paving, there are no standards for permeable infrastructure except our Green Streets standards. We worked very hard to develop Green Street standards. So if we're going to allow any kind of hard surfaces that purports to be permeable, we should be looking at making sure that those standards are met, and that just like our green development standards, the stormwater that is created on-site should be kept on-site. So there should not be any net increase in stormwater as a result of installing front yard parking pads. So before you is an amendment that will allow for the building of many, many, many more front yard parking pads that cannot and will not be permeable in areas that are basement flooding areas. Basement flooding area number 1 in Topham Park and in Parkview Hills and Woodbine Gardens, we're spending almost $20 million to create infrastructure to stop flooding, and yet we're opening the door with this motion to allow for the installation of front yard parking pads. That is the wrong way to go. And we work very hard as we face increasing storm, extreme weather, and climate change. We know that what we need to do is move in exactly the opposite direction. So I put forward a motion on page 2 that asks you to refer it back to staff and ask for a further report.
It's with a heavy heart that I have to tell you that your time has now come to an end.
I'm watching it. I just wrapped it up.
Thank you.
Refer it back to staff.
Give her the gavel.
Are there any questions for Janet? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. And how long do I have for questions?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay.
Oh, we'll just let you have your fun.
Thanks. Thanks so much
I'm going to
for,
run the clock.
appreciate you coming down and the correspondence. So we've got new correspondence over lunch. Was this on the public record or is this private correspondence?
Oh, it was submitted as communication, yes.
So it's on the
public
file?
record.
Okay, wonderful. So one of your concerns that you just mentioned, pardon the pun, but it sounds like we might be opening the floodgates on parking pads because it concerns our stormwater management. And in the letter here, the proliferation of, that's a good joke. Yeah, yeah. Okay, sorry.
Use a lead pipeline.
Yes, yes.
Very good.
Yes,
So-
yes, I'd be happy to give you 5 minutes on
So do you know when the changes to the current front yard parking regulations came in?
2007.
Right, so you were on council from '03 to 2018, so
No,
presumably...
from '03 to '07
No,
was the period in which,
I'm just saying you were on council from '03 to 2018, so
Yes.
you were there.
yes,
And so you had an opportunity to be a part of this, probably lots of correspondence and discussion on it, at which they were adopted. Do you know how many of these parking pads have been, since those regulations came into place, have been implemented across the city?
no, I actually don't, across the city?
Yeah.
Well, there is no front yard parking pad provisions in anywhere else.
Well, there's 4 zones, and they all have different...
In the city of Toronto.
If we could have a question and answer, it would go so much more smoothly.
Sure. So the answer, or so you said no, the answer is 400 across the city of Toronto since 2007.
Uh-huh.
So I guess the question would be what, in terms of a proliferation, what sort of numbers are you anticipating?
Well,
that
I
we would
think
see?
400 is
In over a
terrible.
decade.
Is terrible.
Right.
I know that there are over 200 illegal front yard parking pads in.
That's a separate issue,
No,
and I think it's
the
something
same
we should
issue.
address.
Really a question and answer format is what we're doing here, okay? So you ask a question.
Okay.
The deputy answers the question, and then if you wish, you can ask another question.
Okay.
Janet, did you have more were you in the middle of answering your question?
I thought that the counselor was going to say I was here all that time and what did I do about it? So maybe I am anticipating and answering the wrong question. But what I wanted to do, and expressed it many times around this circle, is to create an environment where we're not building any more hard surfaces for parking, except in very exceptional circumstances. And so we should have authorized on-street parking everywhere so that people park where there is already hard surfaces. And I understand that that's been moved off. But secondly, I do believe that if we're going to legalize existing ones or build any new ones, that there has to be an environmental benefit from it. And so my motion says refer it back and have a report back so that you're not imposing the new bylaw amendments before you get the environmental benefits.
So can I ask you a question then, since I'm asking questions? What is your biggest concern around front yard parking pads?
Stormwater.
Okay, stormwater.
Stormwater management and hard
In
service.
2017, our general manager of transportation services presented a report to PWIC. Do you remember that? In any case, she outlined the environmental impacts of stormwater runoff, very specifically, in that report. Do you have a sense of the impact of stormwater runoff associated with parking pads versus driveways?
It would all depend on the materials that
Right.
are used.
Which they discussed.
And we should have green, we should be using the Green Streets technical guidelines to be implemented along with any further provisions of front yard parking pads. Or what we're going to do is to continue to worsen the stormwater problem in our community. And so that what I'm simply suggesting is refer it back and then consider whether or not to grant any further access to front yard parking, but only if there are increased environmental benefits.
So would you consider reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the city of Toronto an environmental benefit?
Of course it is.
Okay.
But it doesn't but it doesn't relate to stormwater.
But it does relate to parking pads.
They are mutually reinforcing. Presumably, the city as well is already working, as it was several years ago, on developing an electric car strategy. And presumably, that's somewhere within, and I'm simply saying, put that along with the other environmental standards for stormwater and bring it back together.
So
that
if
at
you had
least-
permit, I'm going to ask a question. If you had permit parking in East York, and you had, say you had a mutual driveway, you satisfied all the requirements outlined in Chapter
Last question.
918 for a front yard parking pad, but you wanted to have an electric vehicle, and the biggest challenge to having an electric vehicle was you had nowhere to charge it, what would your recommendation be for that individual who wanted to have an EV vehicle?
Well, one, I don't think the solution should just be Ward 19. I mean, we need to look at this as a citywide issue. It should be a citywide issue, and we should be looking at a strategy that is not just for one ward. And we should not be increasing the amount of parking pads without the environmental benefit of stormwater management and electric
I'm going to ask you
charging, if
to
that's what
wrap
we
up
wanna do.
there. Are there any other questions? Councillor Matlow.
Madame Davis,
Oui?
est-ce que
C'est pas en français, s'il
oui,
vous
je sais,
plaît.
je sais,
Non,
je
non,
sais.
non, non.
Mamie, est-ce que c'est possible pour toi répéter?
Oui?
I'm
Tous les-
delighted,
tous les
I'm
plus
delighted,
info-
I'm delighted, but
Non, enfin, tous les points plus importants
Oui?
de votre parole en français. Est-ce que c'est possible?
Non, pas maintenant, parce
du tout?
que... Pas maintenant.
Ok, mais
En privé.
c'était
privé.
formidable de te voir aujourd'hui. Merci.
okay, since we don't have Hansard, maybe we can get simultaneous translation in the future.
We should.
I know. We have serious public business to conduct. Are there any other questions of the deputy? Seeing none, thank you very much, Janet. It's been a treat having you back. Elizabeth Nadeau.
Ah oui?
Hello, Elizabeth. We promise to treat you better.
You speak French?
All right, can I just say at the very beginning, I do not want to answer in French.
Very good.
Despite my surname, that would be, it would be just embarrassing for me. Thank you for hearing me. I'm a resident of Ward 32. I'm fairly new to the neighborhood, and I live about a block from the water. I have a mutual drive and a street parking permit. I know I'm very fortunate to live where I do, and was advised that I could apply for a parking pad when I bought the house once I became a resident. What I didn't know when I moved in was the nightmare of finding parking close to your home when you live as close to the water as I do in the peak of the summer, and just forget about the nights where there's fireworks, because you can't park anywhere near your house for blocks if you don't come home early. More importantly, I live alone, and I prosecute gang activity in the city for a living. So initially, my main concern for a parking permit was my safety. I applied. I was told that I couldn't apply, that the code had changed. The municipal code no longer allowed any applications in my neighborhood. The other significant reason was that I wanted to move to an electric vehicle. I was told there's not even a point of appeal when I couldn't even apply for the factor. Now, like so many Canadians, I'm frightened by the horrors of climate change, and I won't go into the details some of the other speakers have. The neighborhood that I live in is very environmentally conscious, as am I, and I want to start to reduce my carbon footprint. I am ready to buy an electric vehicle and would have one now if I had a parking pad. I understand the last speaker's concerns, but there are ways to make a parking pad green. My plan would be to put the grass block pavers where there's grass growing in between the rocks. There's simply 2 strips of those on the lawn. You won't even notice them if the car's not actually parked there. Those stones are known to reduce stormwater runoff, which the last speaker was concerned about, and recharge the groundwater. The charging station would also be surrounded by plants and pleasing to the eye. I support Councilman Bradford's initiative here. I think it's about time that if all levels of government have been saying for the past 8 months that they support green initiatives, this is one that should be supported. It's an opportunity for the council to demonstrate that commitment. If restrictions want to be put on it, that it's exclusively for electric parking, and that before the pad is legal, the applicant has to install at their cost the charging station, then I think that would be something that certainly I would be happy to do, and anyone else I know in the neighborhood who's considering that, who can't do that with permit parking, would like it. So unless there's any questions, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your time today. Andrew Browning. Can I have a copy?
Good afternoon to the committee. When we purchased our home about 2.5 years ago, we knew there was no legal front yard parking pad. An earlier Committee of Adjustment decision at our property had allowed a reduction of the front landscaped area, and there is a paved area too. We are ready to park a car, other than the fact that there's no sidewalk cut to allow access. The neighbors on either side of our house have licensed front parking pads, along with many other neighbors on our block. Our street, Crew Avenue, is a one-way street eastbound. Crew is 9 streets north of Danforth Avenue, just south of Lumsden, and 2 streets west of Main Street, to give you an idea of my neighborhood. It's a quiet residential area. On our block, the north side has on-street parking, but there's none on the south side, which is our side of the street. 12 of the 28 houses on our block have licensed front parking pads, and another 10 have driveways for parking. The remaining 6 houses, including ours, have only on-street parking as an option. It can be challenging to find a place to park on our block with the many driveways that require access, along with the fire hydrants where you can't park. I would say for the most part, I think the neighbors do a good job of not taking extra space to allow 2 cars to park between some of the driveways, although sometimes one poorly parked car occupies 2 possible spaces. And of course, in the winter, snow piles typically occupy several of these spaces that would otherwise provide room to park. One neighbor right across the street blocks their own driveway with their second vehicle, which is kind, since nobody else can park there, and this leaves another space open on the street. Allowing my property to have a front yard parking pad would have no detrimental impacts. There is already a paved spot to park. The front area where you would park is already paved, and that's been approved through a Committee of Adjustment, as I mentioned. It would take one more car off the street to allow the neighbors easier access for guest parking, occasional parking, and provide revenues to the city. As a guiding principle, parking rules in the City of Toronto should be equitable. I have no objection to the current fees that are payable related to a new parking pad application, which includes the application fee itself, the cost for tree planting, the cost of the curb cut and other miscellaneous items, plus the annual fee. If the city wishes to raise funds for on-street EV stations, which I'm supportive of, this should be done across the tax base and not be borne by new parking pad applicants. Though I am not presently an owner of an electric vehicle, I see this as being only a matter of time. I'm supportive of Councillor Bradford's initiative to harmonize front yard parking pad rules across the city and to permit new applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
If I may ask a question related to...
So I'm very sorry. The way it works is that you give us your deputation and then we ask you questions. We don't set it up so that you can ask us questions.
It was... Okay. It has to do with Ms. Davis's point about the clarity of current parking rules. And I've been advised that I can't make an application, but if I understood Ms. Davis's statement correctly, I would have a means to appeal since A, I don't have permission to apply for a front yard parking pad, and B, my block doesn't permit on-street parking permits.
So, sir, I'm very sorry. We don't answer questions from the public in this format. I suggest that if you have any questions about how City of Toronto bylaws work, that you check with your local councillor.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you very much. Next, I have Brian Wolk. Good afternoon, Brian. You'll have 5 minutes and you can monitor your time on the wall clock over there to my right. Welcome.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Brian Walk, and I'm a longtime resident of Toronto and East York. I am thankful to have been given the privilege to speak with you today about this matter. This is something that my family has been trying to gain traction on for the past 5 years. Our growing family, 2 small kids and 1 more on the way, currently live in a semi-detached home on Main Street. We have a dirt patch in the front, and we have been trying to get it converted to a parking pad since we moved in. We have done countless hours of research into the front pad bylaw restrictions, trying to learn why they were implemented in the first place, and despite our efforts, we continually get denied. Originally, we wanted a parking pad to help our family stay safe. Main Street is extremely busy with drivers who regularly exceed the speed limit. Crossing a very busy street multiple times a day with 2 kids and bags is dangerous for our family. To add to this, my wife and my son both suffer from asthma, and it has become increasingly difficult to park far from our home when there are no street spots available. We've seen so many home rebuilds in our neighborhood, all with new driveways that weren't there prior, and whenever we question why they all got approved, we're told that they found loopholes in the system. This is extremely unfortunate, frustrating, and unfair. What really excelled this issue into high gear for us now is that we are now an expanding family with a baby on the way, and given this, we have an immediate need for a new vehicle that can accommodate 3 children. While I agree that we have a vast public transit network, and we generally make use of it when we can, there are times that we need to venture out of the city to see doctors, specialists, as well as to visit family, and thus we have a major need for a car. My family strives to be green, and so we are dead set on our next vehicle being electric. Given the current state of climate change in the world, there's an immediate need to retire gas-powered vehicles from our streets and replace them with EVs. Most major car manufacturers have already outlined their roadmaps for the next 20 years, which include phasing out gas car production entirely in favor of EVs. What will we do when in the near future our neighborhoods have failed to adapt to this important positive change? If gas vehicles are no longer available, what will people do who need a personal vehicle but their homes and neighborhoods don't offer electric charging stations? Now is the time to plan ahead and retrofit our old streets for electric vehicles, or our ward risks becoming less functional and overall less attractive in other wards and other regions in the GTA. We have tried every method possible to obtain an EV, trying to get a full green parking pad installed, which we were denied, and even thought about running an extension cord from our house to our street, and of course we were told that it's unacceptable. Each corner we turn to try and go green, we have been denied. There is no reason that in a world-class city like Toronto, we should be denied the ability to help save the planet. I implore you to help me, help my family, help fight climate change, align with all other levels of government to help East York become the model for the rest of Toronto by amending or rolling back this antiquated bylaw that was put into practice before electric vehicles and green pads were an option. Help us shape the future before it's too late. Please work together to embrace EV technology in our neighborhoods and support Councillor Bradford's initiative. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No? Thank you very much. Brenda Linneman. Brenda?
Yes, well, many of the speakers have mentioned that it isn't really realistic to assume that everyone can do without a car. Many people have reasons why they need to have a car. Ours is the fact that my husband has a mobility disability, and he often has to park a long way from our home. A parking pad can be constructed in a way to improve stormwater runoff. In our case, we are currently changing a solid shared parking drive to a permeable surface. So it would be nice if that could be clarified as to what is required in that regard. We definitely support anything that will improve the greening of our environment, and we would certainly be enthusiastic about putting an EV infrastructure at the front of our home. Thank you.
Thank you. Brenda, don't run away. Councillor Fletcher has a question for you. Over here.
Over here, Brenda.
Right beside me.
Right here.
Right on my left-hand side here. There we go.
Hi.
Hi. Have you ever applied for a spot that's dedicated if you have this type of mobility issue?
Yes, we're aware that we would be able to have a designated spot, but we don't want to encroach on the neighbors if that's necessary. It would be actually better for the situation as a whole if we could simply park on our own property without making a curb cut. So that's why we would prefer to do that.
I'm not sure what you mean by not without making a curb cut.
Well, we have a shared driveway.
We have a
so
shared
we
driveway,
could-
I see.
We
Okay,
could put the.
thank you. Yeah.
But I'd like to also make a point that when we went to get an application, it was just an immediate no. And I think it should be noted that applications should be looked at because there could be individual situations which deserve having a review.
Okay, thank you.
When you went, did anybody let you know there are these provisions for, we actually passed a whole bunch of them here today, installing accessible and handicap spots in the city. Did they provide you with that information?
We're quite aware of that.
Okay, all right.
My husband has attempted to park in these kind of places in other sections of the city, which include an argument from the owner who thought that that was designated for herself only.
Right.
So I don't really think that those are ideal.
Okay.
If another solution can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Sankar? Good afternoon, Ryan. So Ryan, you'll have 5 minutes, and if you need to monitor your time, you can see it on the wall clock over here to my right. Please start.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this matter today. I'm the owner of 812 Salmon Avenue, and I've been a resident of Beaches East York since 2016. My family and I have fallen in love with this community over the past few years and hope to call it home for the foreseeable future. So much so that when our daughter was born last year and we needed more space, my wife and I decided to make the short move from our old house down the street at 843 Salmon Avenue to our current home. We've come to know the friends we made on the street as family, and that was a big factor in us staying here. Shortly after we moved into our new home, a parking enforcement officer visited while I was at work and issued my wife a parking infraction for parking on our driveway. He advised that we weren't legally allowed to park there and that barriers would be installed to prevent us from doing so in the future. I found that threat to be unnecessarily drastic. A curb cut currently exists along our frontage, and the previous owners parked there all the time. There's evidence of this in the historical Google Street View photos of our property going back to 2009. Furthermore, the parking pad is currently paved with permeable material as per the requirements of the municipal code, and it also complies with the dimensional requirements for a front yard parking pad as specified in the municipal code. Additionally, there's no on-street parking on our side of the street, so our curb cut has no impact on the available parking supply in the neighborhood. Given that it appears that I should be fully eligible to apply for a front yard parking permit for my property according to the municipal code, I went to the parking office at the East York Community Center to apply for a legal permit immediately after I received the infraction. However, city staff there advised me that they were no longer accepting applications and that I would have to apply for on-street parking. I asked if I had the opportunity to appeal, and they told me I didn't because there's a moratorium on applications in my ward. I find this situation to be unreasonable based on the following facts. The curb cut for our parking space already exists. To me, this signals that at one point a legal parking space did exist in this location. With our car parked on the driveway, it does not encroach onto the pedestrian sidewalk on the north side of the street. In fact, there's enough room to accommodate a 5.3 meter long space with a 0.3 meter setback from the back sidewalk as required by the code. In this segment of Salmon Avenue, there is no parking on the north side of my street at any time. Therefore, reinstating this curb would not result in more on-street parking being available for use by the public or other residents of the neighborhood. On-street parking on Salmon Avenue is very hard to come by. In fact, on-street parking permits are 90 to 99% subscribed in my area, according to information on the city's website. It does not make sense to force us to park our car on the street, taking up one more valuable space when I have a perfectly functional and existing parking space in our front yard. Furthermore, a lot of these on-street spaces are lost to snow storage in the winter, as one of the previous speakers mentioned. Given that on-street parking isn't always available in front of our house, we'd regularly be forced to park some distance away from our front door. This makes traveling with an infant unnecessarily more difficult. Also, Salmon is a busy street, so busy that speed humps were installed last year. It is significantly less safe for us to cross a busy street with a child than it is for us to park in our own driveway. This is especially true now that Salmon Avenue has been made a truck route for construction vehicles related to the Michael Guerin Hospital project. There are several legal front parking pads on Salmon Avenue on the north side of the street. Our neighbor immediately to the east of us has one. Given this precedent, I believe it is inequitable to deny us a permit for an existing, functional, and unobtrusive front yard parking space. How is our house different from any of the others? I'm trying to make my best effort to get this matter resolved through the proper channels and process. I could, like many people in this neighborhood and city do, maintain an illegal parking space and take my chances with enforcement. However, I believe it's my civic duty to pay the appropriate fees for utilizing a portion of the municipal right-of-way. Given the above, I fully support this motion put forth by Councillor Bradford. A complete moratorium on front yard parking permits in our ward is ignorant of the practical needs of the community, and I'm not sure what it intends to achieve other than encouraging illegal parking and exacerbating existing neighborhood parking capacity issues. I'm not against policy that aims to ensure a sustainable society as we move into the future. I am all for prioritizing transit, cyclists, and pedestrians over private vehicles within the public realm. However, these policies should be implemented in a manner that's practical and equitable. We still live in a city where utilizing a private vehicle is necessary in some instances and is more than just a convenience, particularly for families with small children like ours. None of my neighbors seem to have an issue with the parking condition on my lot, so why should I not be allowed to apply for a permit? Why should I be forced to occupy an on-street parking space that could be utilized by a resident that doesn't have a driveway on their property? It's simply not an efficient...
Ryan, I'm going to ask you for your final thought.
Sure. Lifting the moratorium on these permit applications in our ward will logically allow responsible homeowners to apply for a legal permit to use the parking space they regularly rely on.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the deputy? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a deputation on this item? I don't see any. Are there any questions of staff? Councillor Layton.
Thank you. Just because it's come up a couple times, it's not really the subject of the report, so I'll ask for a little latitude from the chair. On the permeability, there was reference to a report, a 2017 report on permeability, and that report mentions an industry scan. Can someone tell me what that industry scan was and how much research went into it? If not, that's a fair question because I've added something to the agenda that I hope to answer that question. Like, I'm just curious if we looked at what was on offer. Can someone tell me then what requirements do we have when someone's putting in a legal front yard parking pad for permeability? Who check? Like, what is it and who checks?
Through Chair, our Transportation Standards Officer would verify the permeability once the work is completed, that it's the acceptable pavers.
And where did this list of pavers come from?
They're the ones that's in the report.
So, but did we verify their permeability, or did we? Because it says an industry scan. So I'm just wondering, how did we verify their permeability?
I believe previous staff may have done the verification. That's before I took over this position.
Okay, that's a fair answer. I'm wondering, because in conversations with the local councillor, there's been an issue with people going through a back door to get a front yard parking pad, and I'm just trying to understand how prevalent that problem is.
Through Chair, if there is a lot that's deep enough to park on private property, they can go through zoning for a zoning review, and if they can ask for a variance through the Committee of Adjustment to totally park on private property. And if this is approved, then they would come to Transportation Services and request the area on the city boulevard to be paved and ask for a curb cut, which it could impact permit parking, but since it's approved by Committee of Adjustment, even though there is maybe a loss of a permit parking space, we still have to grant the curb cut.
Do we have any idea on how prevalent the problem is? Like, are we talking 1 or 2 applications, 30?
Well, we receive about 5 to 10 applications with regards to parking every 2 weeks from committee, but it's depending on if they can park on private, then we do not comment.
You don't comment?
No.
So if they can park on private property, then the city doesn't comment at all?
No, because that's a separate bylaw. That's a Planning Act
Okay,
bylaw.
that's good to know. Okay, so planning staff might comment, but your staff don't?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Through the chair, Staff and Transportation Services, does the motion that I have in the letter, does that establish anything new that doesn't already exist in the City of Toronto in terms of rules and regulations?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Does my motion that's outlined in the letter, does that establish the first 3 parts there with changes to Chapter 918? Does that establish anything new that doesn't currently exist within the rules?
Several former wards, like former Ward 11, 12, 13, 16, 17, 21 do allow, if there's a mutual driveway, they can apply for front yard parking.
So these rules that I'm proposing exist elsewhere in TEYCC.
Correct.
And when was the moratorium brought in on Ward 31?
It was implemented in 2009.
Okay. So one thing we hear about is people going through the Committee of Adjustment as a backdoor route for parking pads. Can you tell us some of the ways people are, where there's currently a moratorium, like Ward 31, East York, try to get permission for a parking pad? They're not able to do because of the moratorium brought in 2009. How do they go about doing that now through the Committee of Adjustment?
Well, if they have a deep enough lot, then they can apply through the Committee of Adjustment to park totally on private property.
And if the variance is granted by the C of A, irrespective of whether permit parking is impacted or not, Transportation Services will have to approve the resultant request to pave the Boulevard City portion to gain access to the front yard pad, which includes providing a permitted curb cut. Is that correct?
That's correct, and there's no ruling as to if it has to be permeable or not. It could be asphalt or concrete.
So,
We recommend them to pave with permeable pavers, but that's not mandated by C of A.
but if we went through the front yard parking process that I'm proposing, we would have checks and balances just as there are in other front yard parking pads here in the city of Toronto. We would actually be able to address the stormwater management piece and the permeable pavers. However, through the C of A variance approach, you don't have that control. Is that correct?
Correct.
And can you clarify what environmental standards are around things like permeability or soft landscaping that currently apply in Chapter 918 as proposed in my motion?
So depending on the width of the lot, we limit the size of the parking pad. So if they have a large lot, then they can get the maximum size parking pad. But if it's a smaller size pad, their size are limited. And the rest would have to be soft landscaping.
And does Chapter 918 on front yard parking pads, do we provide requirements for permeability and soft landscaping, additional soft landscaping than what would be there now?
Additional, I don't understand.
There's requirements for soft landscaping and permeability through Chapter 918, is that correct?
Correct,
But not the backdoor C of A process.
correct.
So is it reasonable to conclude that because there's a moratorium in former Ward 31, people actually circumvent the process and go through C of A backdoor because the process is broken to get front yard parking?
If they have a deep enough lot, they can do that. But if there's not enough depth, then they won't be able to apply through C of A.
Okay, and just to confirm, my office has been engaging with you on this motion in this file? Like we've discussed this?
Yes.
Thank you. Energy environment staff, any folks here?
Yes, we're here.
Oh, great, okay, so, yep, we're here. What percentage of GHGs in the city come from people driving combustion engine cars? Transportation-related emissions, what are those? 40%.
Roughly 38%.
Great, thank you. And what's our goal in Transform TO to get combustion engine cars off the road?
100% by 2050.
When did we start the current council-approved pilot project on providing curbside charging stations, and where are we on that now?
We're currently finalizing the details with Toronto Hydro. We should implement on-street charging by the end of the month.
When did it start, though? That was
Sorry, that was your last question.
The question was...
That was your last question. Thank you. I have a few questions. So since we have energy environment staff on the floor, you have in front of a plan for the City of Toronto Transform TO. In designing Transform TO, you brought in consultants to look at the available sources of energy, our electricity capacity, and so on. And the recommendation was to not fully implement electric vehicle fleets right now because the City of Toronto electricity grid does not have capacity to do that. Correct? It's correct.
I'm answering on behalf of transportation. That is correct.
So that's correct, right. And in order to increase the system electricity capacity in the City of Toronto, we would need to bring in a third major line into the City of Toronto. My memory is that the cost of doing that was $100 billion. Am I in the right ballpark?
I don't have that.
You don't know. Okay, thank you. Just to, the Transform TO plan says that we don't have an electricity capacity. The Energy Environment Division, yes. So in any event, we established that the electrical grid can't.
Who are they?
I'm sorry, could you give us your names, please?
So my name is Nadine Haj. I'm with the Environment and Energy Division,
you.
but I can't confirm that.
Ah, okay.
Sorry.
And I'm Naz Capano from Transportation Services.
Thank you very much. Now, we got some answers a moment ago about the Committee of Adjustment and it not having the same requirements. When someone brings a proposal to the Committee of Adjustment to put a parking pad entirely on the private side, I've had the experience of transportation staff and planning staff writing, reminding the Committee of Adjustment of the requirements in our bylaw and encouraging them to either turn it down or to make sure that the soft landscaping and tree planting pieces are met. That's practice now, isn't it?
It's recently implemented for wards that are
Where the
in
moratorium is in
yeah.
place. Similarly, if someone comes and brings a recommendation to this community council and asks for a parking pad, this community council, the same as the Committee of Adjustment, can take your advice, alter your advice, or ignore your advice altogether. Is that correct?
For a committee of,
No, if an appeal comes here to this
Yes,
community council.
correct.
Yes, thank you very much. Those are my questions. To speak, Councillor Bradford.
You held the item. Do you want to go first? Or do you want me to? Okay. Thanks very much. I'm going to just speak from here because I got a couple slides on the projector. I would like to start by thanking everyone for their input on this motion. It's been great getting to work with my colleagues and try and get it to a place that's supportable and makes sense and allows us to listen to considerations of residents in Ward 19 and move forward. And I'd actually really like to thank the deputants who took time out of their busy day to come down and speak on this important issue.
Councillor, I'm sorry, the clerk advises me. I'll stop.
I'd like to put the motion on the screen, please.
Yes, so if you
Thanks.
could start with your motion first,
Yep.
please.
So I'll put the motion on the screen. There's some changes than what you've seen in the letter based on the feedback from my council, my community council colleagues. So I think that those amendments will address a number of your concerns and
We have
trust
the
that
circular,
this will be supportive. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Well,
Okay, it's fine. I'm gonna
traditionally
keep
we
going.
do, but I understand that that's a lot of work, so I'll just have it circulated and we
Sure.
can read it. Yeah.
So, and again, thanks to all the deputants who came down. We had more than 120 pieces of correspondence on this in my office, which is an incredible amount for something that isn't actually a planning file. So this motion is really about us providing one more support for the rollout of electric vehicles while updating the parking pad rules in the new Ward 19. The relationship, as we've heard, between parking pads and electric vehicles may not be clear to everyone on this committee, but I think that there is a relationship there. And it's pretty simple, because unless you have a private drive or a garage, there's no way that you can actually charge your electric vehicle near your home. So, you can't run a cord across the sidewalk, and even if you wanted an electric vehicle today, The biggest barrier is actually not being able to charge it. So staff have told us in the October 2017 report preparing Toronto for EVs, 80% of EVs are charged at home, and many people currently are just not able to do that. There's very few options for on-street charging. And the question I had to staff that they were not able to answer there was if this started in 2012. That was the genesis of this. And we are now 2019, coming up on 2020. And in fact, where we're at with respect to a pilot program, not very good. So here's a picture I took this morning for you to take a look at, if we can get that on the screen. This is one of our pilot stations that was supposed to have been operational this summer. We're not even close to being up and running, if we can just get the monitor on there. And citywide, we have a grand total of 16 stations. So what you're looking at right there is the conduit, I believe, and there's actually nothing even hooked up to it. That's our EV program, pretty abysmal. So you may haven't heard about this from your residents, but in Ward 19 it does come up all the time. The feedback and correspondence from the deputants speaks to that, and a number of quotes from the survey. You know, the biggest one is these types of policies are absolutely necessary if Toronto is serious about fulfilling its recent call to declare a climate emergency. If we recognize that 40%, 38% of our emissions are from combustion vehicles, if we recognize and acknowledge that we have a goal to eliminate those by 2050, I'm just not seeing the roadmap based on the progress and the speed at which we're moving today. If we were to take the 16 stations and forward that at that rate of progress to 2050, we would have 96 installed across the city. I don't think that's enough to do it. Permeability has come up a lot. Here's a slide from 2017. Report to PWIC that clarifies it. There was a lot of confusion there. You've seen this report because you guys have been here. But basically, it's from Barbara Gray, our General Manager of Transportation Services. It's very clear that the cumulative effects of parking pads have had a minimal impact on stormwater runoff. So the question we're talking about is, you know, are we trying to move forward on GHG emissions? Are we trying to provide practical and pragmatic solutions to the challenges facing residents and move forward with an EV regime that uses a collective response? I think we are, and this motion helps us do that. As you heard from the questions, many people are using a C of A process as a backdoor route to getting parking pads. It actually leads to more paved areas. When you have to pave across the public boulevard and then extend further, and we have less control, as we heard here, for actually controlling the permeability. I know that's a view that Councillor Perks shares as well. These questions keep coming up. Why change the bylaw now? I think it's urgent, and if we have a climate emergency and we're not doing everything to address it, then that's on us. The important thing is we're trying to give people who want an EV a path to do that. In 2009, Ward 31 slapped a moratorium rather than dealing with the difficult issues of working through this that we are trying to do now. I'm looking at the clock, don't worry, Councillor Perks. And even now, we've touched on the rules. I think they are confusing. That's certainly staff's view as well.
Could I ask you for your final thought, please?
Yeah, well, I don't really think that we should defer this motion. I think it is complicated, but this provides regulations that are already on the books.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'm going to speak next. So I have a motion that the Toronto East York Community Council refer the item to the General Manager Transportation Services and request a report back to the February 5th, 2020 meeting on the following: A, right-of-way management; B, the capacity of Toronto's electricity system; C, the tree canopy; D, stormwater management; E, urban design; F, pedestrian safety; G, staff resources required to monitor the use of parking pads to ensure that they are only used by an electric vehicle. These are very, very difficult issues for a lot of us in the community. We are in that most painful moment of transitioning from one kind of transportation system to another. And many, many things are going to have to change. And that transition is going to create awkward moments of tension. Some of us are of the view that if we continue to expand the amount of the city's surface that is available for cars to park on, we will have more cars on our road, more congestion, more resources consumed in the manufacture of those cars, more resources consumed in the generation of electricity to move those. One piece of this which is particularly tricky, is our electricity system in the City of Toronto is at capacity. We only have 2 wires that come into the city. And if we quickly move to transition vehicles over to electricity, we will blow that system out and we will not be able to reliably deliver electricity in the City of Toronto. So our current climate plan was to create electricity efficiency to reduce electricity demand so that we could open up the space for those vehicles that we need, not those vehicles that we choose, but those vehicles that we need to be run on electricity. But we need to create that room first, because bringing a 3rd wire into the city would cost $100 billion and require the demolition of several thousand homes. Further, we have long had advice from our planning department that it is not a desirable outcome to have between our sidewalks and the front wall of houses up and down streets rows of parked cars. It's actually in our zoning bylaw that you cannot park a car or have a parking space for a car in front of the front wall of your house unless a specific exemption is granted to you. That's why you have to go to the Committee of Adjustment or come here. Additionally, our water staff have been telling us for well over 20 years that even though we already have a lot of hard surface dedicated to cars, our approach should be no more. Even if the parking pad is not as bad as an existing driveway, adding either is adding too much. Additionally, our transportation staff have repeatedly told us that having many breaks along a pedestrian sidewalk in a neighborhood that small children use creates additional risk. At a time when we're talking about trying to achieve Vision Zero, increasing the number of vehicles that are moving on and off the roadway and into houses is of risk. We have been told that our tree canopy is too small and we need to be expanding it. That's why we have a private tree bylaw. This, incidentally, the proposal by Councillor Bradford would override some of the provisions in the private tree bylaw. So there's a lot here that has to be weighed, pro and con. And rather than have a member of council ask staff to draft a bylaw without attaching all the analysis and the trade-offs so that we can make an informed decision, I would prefer that we get all of these questions in front of us so that we can have an informed debate rather than having each of us bring whatever document we chose to source our opinion from, and we could be working off one set of documents and understand where it comes from. So that's why I'm moving this referral. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you. As a city, I think we need, overall as a city, sorry, Councillor, did you have questions? Yeah. So he had questions. Yeah, sorry, I'll pause.
Sure. Let me just set the clock. There we go. Okay.
It's very short. I just
Yes.
want to confirm that your motion includes my recommendations as well.
That's what I'm referring.
Yeah.
So
it's
that will be in the staff's hands along with a requirement.
plus these items.
Plus a request for a report on these items vis-a-vis your letter. Okay?
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's all there.
It's all there.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll ask the mover a question too, just on some clarity around.
Councillor Layton, you have a question for me.
Thank you very much. So just to confirm, because I think it's there, but I want to make crystal clear for maybe staff's benefit as much as all of ours, that the notion of harmonizing wards 31 and 32 will also be reported. Your intent by your motion is
My
to report
intent
back
is
on
to
the
take-
section that of the letter that harmonizes.
My intent is to take the letter that the councillor put on the agenda, the motion from the councillor's letter, sorry, I should speak more precisely, and have staff review it with those 8 items
in mind. Sure.
Yeah.
And then report back. And what's
And then
the date
report
for the
back to February 2020. I gave a little bit more time because it's quite complex.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, so can we administratively do that? One moment, there's just a little. Can you add,
It's the motion.
can you
not the
add
letter.
and all amendments that were considered by the committee?
Yes.
Okay, so to make things even more precise, I'm going to amend my motion to add and all amendments considered by the committee, so that way we have both your original motion and your proposed amendment. So all of that will be in the general manager's hands. Okay? All right. Were there any other questions of the mover?
I do.
Councillor Fletcher.
So as I read Councillor Bradford's letter and his suggested motions before this came, it was really about driveway widening because there was only one curb cut. And your motion has to do with parking pads. Is that
So-
right?
No, my motion has to do both with parking pads and with Councillor Bradford's original motion and amended motion. So
Which
all
I'm
of that
establishing
material.
was driveway
The
widening.
driveway widening piece will be there, the front yard parking pad piece will be there because there's an amendment to the front yard and boulevard rules here. So all of that material that we've considered will be sent to the general manager.
And the Vision Zero part that you mentioned, I don't see that.
It says F pedestrian safety.
So
So that will
are
be
you
part of
considering
this.
that to be a Vision Zero
And on
land?
top of that, Councillor, I'm sure, I invite you and any other member of this community council who has advice for the general manager as he's preparing that report to send, as she is preparing that report, to send her any thoughts or advice that you have as well. I can put on a second round of questions if you want. Members, I've been asked for a second round of questions. All in favor, opposed, carried. Councillor Bradford.
Just want to clarify, so are you anticipating that you'll get recommendations as it relates to everything in the aggregate, or will it be parsed out like the recommendations I had proposed and then a bigger conversation, circa 2017 report on parking pads in general?
So the general manager will get all of this, consider it, and then write a report with her advice.
I'm just trying to clarify, will the advice come back to address the specific items in my motion, or is it
All
a
of-
big 2017?
That's at the general manager's discretion. So if the general manager could take the view that what you've proposed is a good idea and give a review based on all these points, why on the balance of public impacts, what you've recommended is the right way to go. The general manager could recommend some different version of what you've proposed. The general manager could say, go forward with none of it.
I think it
But
should
she would
be the
have to
deputy city
provide
manager.
reasoning, including investigating these different impacts.
I guess I would like, or the question is, would you be able to write this in a way so that there's clarity around, we need because this is actually what a lot of the colleagues have suggested. They want staff to review my motion specifically. That's what I'm hearing from
That is part
colleagues.
of what the general manager will
But I would like
review,
it to
but I
come
cannot-
back.
If I could, but I cannot tell you now what her advice on the things that you have put forward would be.
Could we write it in a way, though, so that we specifically
I'm not
ask
going to
about it?
write a motion that tells the general manager what advice to give us.
No, I'm not asking you to do that. Let me clarify. I'm wondering if you could write a motion that requests them to respond specifically to the items separately from a broader conversation about parking pads. Because it sort of sounds like, in the way that you're writing your motion here, you're lumping everything all together. And in fact, we would actually like to refer the item, my item, those 5 motions to be considered by
My
staff.
motion does refer everything you put in front of this committee to the general manager for her to consider.
Share this yourself, Mr. Chair.
Actually, according to the procedural bylaws at committee, yes, you can. Yeah. So your material is all getting referred, Councillor. The general manager will consider all of it. I just can't tell you what her advice will be in advance.
That's correct. I'm now in the chair.
Okay? Are there any other questions in the second round?
Yes.
Seeing, yes.
I have one.
Pardon me? Councillor Fletcher.
I just want to make sure that in the list, because as I recall from previous, and we've been around this track many times here, that urban design or public realm was really clear from a planning standpoint that this was not a desirable outcome for a street. And that is not the role of the general manager of transportation services. So pedestrian safety is right-of-way management, but electricity, tree canopy, stormwater, urban design aren't. And I need to make sure that your motion lifts that up, that this isn't just a transportation viewpoint, that it is a kind of City of Toronto general division, each one of them, ensuring that their viewpoint is captured here for us to consider.
Right, so the
So
intention
should
in
it
my
be the
motion...
deputy city manager, or should it be?
Well, my
Just wanna
thought
make
was,
sure.
so tell you what, and I will add, after transportation services, the word "and other relevant divisions."
Thank you.
On the advice of the clerk.
I simply remember that.
Very good.
And I'll speak to them.
Okay. Any other questions of the mover? Seeing none, I had Councillor Cressy next. Oh, to speak, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is for our latest and newest term of council, our first parking pads below out. It is, I recall my first meeting of TYCC 5 years ago, when I was at the time a new councillor, and that was last term's parking pads below out. I was in the thick of it, because at that point I didn't have a firm position on parking pads as I was still learning. Let me broaden this issue, because when you get into parking pads, you get very much into the details. I mean, at a 30,000-foot level, as a city, I think we need less concrete. I think as a city, we need more green space and a bigger tree canopy. And ultimately, as a city, we need fewer cars. Those are my city objectives. So how do I apply those city objectives to the discussion of parking pads? Let me start by saying that I am very sympathetic to Councillor Bradford's efforts to make it easier to own electric vehicles. And I'm equally sympathetic to many of the deputants we've heard today who are seeking to own and in turn operate conveniently electric vehicles. I'm sympathetic to that. But there is a lot more to the debate of parking pads than simply the conversation around electric vehicles. And so just as I can't support any immediate changes to parking pads as one position, nor can I support one environmental objective, that being to reduce reliance on greenhouse gas emission driving cars, without considering all environmental impacts. In this case, stormwater runoff is one, potential reduction in green space is another, potential reduction in trees is another, and so on and so on. So I cannot support the motion from Councillor Bradford, as sympathetic as I am to his hard work and motivations, and I will be supporting the referral from Councillor Perks. Thank you very much.
I have Councillor Fletcher next. Oh, okay, you want to wait a minute? Okay. Councillor Matlow, are you ready to go? Please.
I know, as Councillor Cressy just said, that this general discussion can, I often describe community council as the kind of committee, one of the rare committees at City Hall where we pretty much agree on virtually everything, up until, 99.9% of the agenda. Many of them go really quickly because we're all just, looking at the local councillor and having a lot of trust. When it comes to parking pads, we do have these blowouts and a lot of friction. I wanted to just spend my moment just acknowledging what I believe Councillor Bradford is trying to do here. One is, I've looked at cities where there is far more access to electric vehicle charging, and with envy, and I would like to see us move forward with that. Councillor Fletcher and I had a conversation about her efforts to increase access for permit parking, cars that have permits to access EV as well, and I just think that is something that will benefit our city. I also, and this is, this is one of my big beefs with this community council when it comes to permit parking. As one of the deputies said earlier, I don't believe that there's enough consideration for the context of a number of these applications. we're sort of split between sometimes just very strong views on the concept of parking pads, and I don't think we often enough get into the context of what people are living with and also what they've been sold. What aggravates me enormously is that, and Councillor Bradford actually wrote this, and I just want to refer to something that Councillor Bradford put in the motion, to paraphrase that there's often a lot of confusion when it comes to the rules. Real estate agents will very, very often, tell people, don't worry about it. Intuitively, it's already paved and it's there, and so of course it's fine. Or even if it's not fine yet, it's a breeze to get through City Hall. So just go and apply after you've bought the house. And a lot of people just don't know what they're getting into, and then they find themselves in situations where their lives are adversely impacted because they don't have ready access to parking and they rely on their car. And we shouldn't have to rely on our cars, but a lot of people do have to rely on their cars. We haven't arrived at a place where they're not. And the reality is that if you don't know where to put your car, that can be an incredible stress in your life. So I would just like to see more contextualized discussions around parking pads rather than just like, we don't like them, so no. And I also really appreciate the benefit of what Councillor Bradford is doing, which is he's really actively listening to the residents of his community, and he's doing what we do in representative democracies. He's reflecting that, and he's bringing it to us. So I do hope that, it looks like we're moving towards asking for the report. I will look to the local councillor for where he'd like to go with this, but I do hope that this report is fairly and objectively considered by all of us, and that we look to how to move forward with some of these ideas rather than just looking for a way to block it, because I really do respect the fact that the local councillor is trying to do something for both his neighborhood, but also for the entire city with respect to easier access to EV. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. I just I've made a friendly amendment that the chair has agreed to, and that's to spell out the divisions rather than say other divisions. So we're really clear that it's city planning, Toronto Water, Office of Environment, Energy and Urban Forestry, because that's there. And the city, the general manager of transportation would understand that. I think we have been grappling with the issue around electric vehicles for a while. And I share Councillor Bradford's frustration that we plan to have electric vehicle charging stations on the street, and there aren't any in permit parking areas. I don't think that's the city. I happen to believe that it's Toronto Hydro that is having a difficult time in figure out how to do that. And just as we have dedicated spaces for people that need accessible places, there will be dedicated spaces for people that have electric vehicles, including, and unfortunately, this started last term, at least 3 or 4 years ago. So I do not understand why this is taking so long, and that is why that motion I moved, that thank you, Councillor Matlow, for referring to that at council, to say get a move on with this. Where is the roadblock? And if the city manager needs to get involved in order to make sure that people that have electric vehicles can charge them if they don't have a place to park on their front yard, then I think he should get involved. Or we need to find out what's going on at Toronto Hydro, that they can't move more quickly on this and many other files that councillors are quite frustrated about. When I was first elected, there was a moratorium in this ward, and I've maintained that moratorium. A moratorium that was asked for by the residents because of the street that simply was all paved. Every front yard on Withrow near Logan was paved. The community said, that is not how we want our streets to look. And there are streets in this city, that is what they're like. They are just paved on every lawn. And that has been an issue. Even not urban forestry, but urban design, city planning have flagged that in the last time we looked at this and said, just as they do in a major planning report, they tell us what we can do on a main street, what it should look like, what the setback should look like. They have weighed in and said, this is not what a neighborhood should look like. It should not be covered with cars on everybody's front lawn. That's not a neighborhood. That's what I recall. So I'm looking forward to hearing if they've changed their opinion. If they have, I'd like to have them here. So when we debate this, I'd like to have every single division here so the questions that we have can be answered. This is not the easy thing to do because some of us believe that the wet weather flow master plan that we worked on for years and years and years, that this is part of wet weather flow. We believe this is part of urban design. I certainly have great sympathy with getting EVs somehow plugged in. And I hope from today that we will ask Toronto Hydro, and I did not move that motion, but I don't know what the holdup is. I can't figure out what the holdup is. We have places that were dedicated, that were laid out, where certain streets have certain places where those are to be electric vehicle charging stations on a city street. And we've been unable to make that happen. It's not the city that hasn't been unable to make that happen. So I see Mr. Baxter's here, and perhaps after I will be, he's here, I'm going to ask that question. If you'd been here earlier, I would have asked you. Because it's so frustrating. It's frustrating for everybody. We announced this pilot with great fanfare. There hasn't been one. Somewhere up the street, that's getting caught, and it's not fair to residents, it's not fair to those who are buying EVs, and it's not fair to those who are in limbo, because we have moratoriums and we can't get anything on the street. So something's got to give here, and I look forward to this report coming back with the input from all of those divisions, and we'll have a longer debate then.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, and I'll try to be very brief. I've been having discussions about this issue with Councillor Bradford since I think his first week on council, and in the desire to address some of the issues that we're facing with parking pads in the City of Toronto. And in particular, I appreciate the position that Councillor Bradford's put in by the changes in the ward boundaries that have one half of his neighbourhood able, and Councillor Bailao as well, one half of the neighbourhood subject to one set of rules and one half to the other. Fortunately, I'm not in that position. No one can get a parking pad or appeal in Ward 11. But this notion of harmonizing, I think, is very important to Councillor, the first four recommendations of Councillor Bradford's motion. And that's what I want to make sure comes back, because if we don't and we just kick the can down the road, we're doing all of us a disservice, because we will, some city councillors, some councillors going to have to resolve this problem. And given what Councillor Bradford knows about how contentious parking pads are in this committee, I commend him for bringing forward a pathway to that solution. I would have preferred, and this is why I'll support the referral, it to come by way of a motion of staff, whether it's a request for a motion from staff or otherwise. It would just have been my preferred pathway to get a resolution in front of us here at council. Partly, just so there's something I can point at to tell people this is why we made this decision, because staff are recommending this course of action, or staff evaluated and that's why it's here, which may indicate where my vote will land when that part of the motion comes back. The second part on EVs, I also think like it's an innovation question. That is this the way that we're going to revolutionize our transportation system with respect to bringing down our greenhouse gases? I've been trying to do a little bit of research here on this, about what are the limiting factors to the growth of EVs in Canada, in Toronto specifically. And it's not necessarily the lack of stations. There are also other models for how we grow the network of charging stations. And this is all with the understanding that it all might be for naught because we don't have the electricity and never will, and so Councillor Perks is right. But But this may be one of the solutions, and it might not be the direction that the city takes in the end, but I think it's worth at least exploring. The second half of that is a concern that I've had around the discussion around permeability. And I think I appreciate the transportation staff put forward a report that said that it wasn't such a big deal, but they weren't saying it's not such a big deal because the water doesn't infiltrate. They were saying it's not such a big deal because parking pads represent such a small portion. And I think it's under 1%. And I wasn't trying to be disingenuous in my letter that lumped front yard parking pads with driveways that represent a far greater amount of impermeable surfaces. But I don't think our staff in that analysis that was quoted from 2017 actually looked at the data, rather just did a scan of what is out there being advertised as permeable. Because in about 5 minutes before I came into committee this morning, I printed out 2 reports, one done by the University of Guelph for the TRCA in 2012 on the evaluation of permeable pavements in cold climates, and the second one done by the U.S. Geological Survey from 2018 on water infiltration on permeable pavements. And the one thing that's clear from both is that very quickly permeable pavements become impervious. Thank you. But it's not what we've all been discussing for the last couple of years about vehicles resting on them in compaction. That's really not what they look at. It's small bits of particulate matter that get on top and clog the small pores. And so they're treated differently. But within a couple of years, you can lose 2/3 to 90% of the permeability in just in a couple of years. I'd put it up on the screen, but what I found interesting is the one that performed the best and could be cleaned easiest, you have to use a vacuum. So we're going to have all these parking pads and our driveways, and every couple years, you're going to have someone come with a big vacuum, unplug the car, plug in the vacuum, and just start vacuuming out the particulate matter. But that's like, we have no way of evaluating what and if those parking pads, but more importantly driveways, are actually still permeable. And I think that that's an important question we need to answer.
You're at the end of your time. Okay. Are there any other motions or speakers? Okay, so you take the referral first, I believe?
You know what, Councillor? Just so one quick thing.
Yes.
I just conferred with one of my colleagues, and she had...
Hang on, we need to have a little huddle. Okay, so as you know, with the procedures, we take a referral motion first. So all those in favor of the referral? Sure. Councillor Cressy, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Perks, Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor Layton. Those opposed to the referral, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Matlow. That carries. Okay. So that brings us to item TE 10.50, inclusion on the City Heritage Register 167 to 185 Queen Street East, and intention to designate under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act 167 Queen Street East. This is added business. It's a letter from Councillor Wong-Tam. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to move the recommendations contained in the letter and to have City Planning report back to the meeting of November 26th of City Council on the inclusion of that particular property in the city's register.
Okay, any questions to the mover? Anyone else to speak on the item? Seeing none, all those in favor, opposed, carried. TE 10.51, that's a letter on parking restrictions Bolton Avenue. Councillor Fletcher.
So I'd like to move the parking restrictions, please.
Any questions of the mover? Anyone else to speak? I'm going to have to ask, your staff. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item TE 10.52, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario liquor license application 254 Lansdowne Avenue basement. Councillor Bailao.
Approve the recommendations in the letter.
Okay. Anyone else to speak? No. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item TE 10.53, installation of speed humps on Joe Schuster Way between King Street West and Dufferin Street. Councillor Cressy.
I'll move the recs in my letter, please.
By the way, as someone who thought about this for years, congratulations.
What?
All those in favor? Opposed?
what?
Carried. I had such trouble with this street when I was the councillor.
Oh.
It wasn't my ward, it got moved.
You've got that now? Is there anything you don't have?
Yeah.
That's the question.
No, by the end of next term, Joe Cressy will
All
be
of
the
Toronto,
councillor for all wards
yeah,
in
it
the
was
city.
almost in your ward. Villiers was almost in your ward. He's
Okay,
got the
item
Portland.
TE 10.54, appointments to the Board of Management of the Waterfront Neighborhood Center.
It's me.
Councillor of course it is. Councillor Cressy.
I'll move the recommendations in the letter from the Waterfront Neighborhood Center.
All those in favor, opposed, carried. Item TE 10.55, expansion of Victoria Memorial Square Park.
Oh, yes. There's a conflict.
We'll still have 5. So we have to record our vote on this. This is,
Brad's over there.
who's the councillor? No, we
We
have,
have 5. We're okay.
I don't have the,
It's me.
Councillor Cressy?
So I will move the recommendations in my letter. And can I just say, very briefly, so this is Victoria Memorial Square, West Precinct to King Spadina, heavily overutilized park. Our recommendation in the letter here is to look at taking over part of the surplus right-of-way currently used for parked cars to expand the park. That's what we're working towards. Taking over the right-of-way currently used for parking cars to expand the parkland to include that. That's the recommendation.
Or you could put a natural gas feature. There's all kinds of.
Or a natural gas feature. Anyway, I'm very much looking forward to the report back because I think this would be a great, innovative, and cost-effective way to expand much-needed parkland in a dense core.
Okay, so I need a recorded vote on this one. Councillor Cressy, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Perks, Councillor Matlow. If someone could inform Councillor Wong Tam that she can rejoin us. Item TE 10.56, strengthening stormwater requirements for parking pads and driveways to enhance resilience. I still have the item. Councillor Matlow.
He's going to.
Oh, you're getting Councillor Wong Tam?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is that?
It's a letter from Councillor Layton. It's a report request.
To staff.
Okay, so.
Which one?
5-6? We really should have considered it together. Where'd Councillor Layton go? Councillor Bradford, I need your advice for a moment.
Referring that to staff.
Councillor Layton brought that letter.
You have 44. That's all 44, and you have a
So
reconciliation.
can I have,
Yeah,
Ellen,
yeah, motion to refer?
to refer it to be considered together with whatever 49?
9.
Okay,
Yeah, is that okay?
I'll figure it out.
Ellen will figure it out. Ellen is smarter than the rest of us. So Councillor Fletcher is moving to refer this to be considered together with item 49.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor, opposed, carried. I think we have a 5-6.
So that's,
No, that was 5-6. So we have remaining 4-4?
we have to go back to 44 and then the reconsideration on 25.
I thought we did the reconsideration. of 20.
New business? We have to do,
Okay, so let's first do 10-4-4. Item TE 10-4-4, temporary safety improvements, Power Street, Ward 13. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the extra time to work on this particular motion. which is directing staff to elevate the priority of the signal installation at Power Street and Adelaide Street East and Richmond Street East, to do that as soon as possible, either by negotiating with the relevant developer who originally had the task of doing so, to see if we can speed that up with him, or I will be happy to release some of Section 37 funding to advance the signal installation.
Okay. On the motion, all in favor, opposed, carried.
And then 25, we should go back to 25.
Oh, I thought we'd done 25.
Well, no, remember, we're going back to 25.
Who was 25?
Any development center. Go to Tracy, go to Tracy.
I don't have one.
Motion on 25 now about the parking. Okay, so, yeah, did you want some more awards? So now, Councillor.
So Councillor Wong-Tam, we also have to, we did put it back on. Yes. So we have item TE 10.25, 373 Front Street East and 90 Mill Street zoning amendment application preliminary report. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. I need to move a third motion to this item. The first two were already adopted, and the
Oh,
third
we have
is...
to reconsider it? Okay, so let's do that. Just for safety's sake, no? Or is it still in front of?
Didn't really do anything the last time.
Yes, we did. We amended it, sorry.
No, you amended it first, and not reconsidered, but then you sort of dispute over the motion, and then you kind of held it down. That was my take on it. Am I wrong? No, it's fine.
Oh, so the advice from the clerk is that we simply vote on this.
It's fine, and then reconsider is fine, and then this.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the clerks for that advice. So the only thing I would need to do, Mr. Chair, is to move this additional motion to the already amended report.
All right. I think there's great clarity on that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Does that take us to the bills?
Yes, it does. I hope I'm not on TV.
No, my mic.
I hope I'm not on TV.
Who has bills?
Secrets are out. Well, that was easy.
No, just
No,
sit,
that-
remain in your seats. Remain in your seats.
Ellen,
We're having a little
we
bit of a problem
apologize that
preparing
you
the
did
bills.
not get to where you needed.
Oh, it's okay. I think I can do it.
Can you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's go fast.
Yeah,
So
I'm
we're
sorry. I'm
just-
just waiting for the bills motion.
The bills will just take a moment. If we can all just relax,
We're having trouble with this printer, so.
breathe in, clean fresh air, breathe out all your stress. Breathe in, clean fresh air.
Nina will be right
Breathe
back.
out all your stress.
Both, yeah. Do you know where to look? Oh, I just. No, it's this. Oh, no.
No comment.
No comment.
Go in there, yeah, and the two motions.
Okay, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to find out what Toronto Hydro. What Toronto.
Let's focus on achieving results now. Councillor Wong-Tam, you have a motion.
Confirmatory?
Yes, I do. That the Toronto and East York Community Council pass and declare as bylaws Bills 1539 to 1565, 1568 to 1569, and 1571 to 1574, prepared for the November 5th, 2019 meeting, 10 of the Community Council.
All those in favor, opposed, carried. Councillor Fletcher, you have a motion.
That the Toronto and East York Community Council pass and declares a bylaw confirmatory bill to confirm the legislative proceedings of the Toronto and East York Community Council acting under delegated authority at meeting 10 on November 5th, 2019.
All those in favor, opposed, carried. Members, that completes our business. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
You did. You saw There was a, yeah.
We can talk about it, but that's, I would say that's the better way to go about it. I know. No, but you just, yeah, but they have to, that's the way you can make something. It's more than the fact that you gotta give notice to everybody that they're about to get excluded. Do you see what I'm saying? That was, that's the bigger issue. Which is why it usually comes up. Right? I understand. Trying to get around that. I get it. I see the like, I mean, the only thing I've seen that. We might face that one day that somebody says, but that's why it's so vital that you